you know. So here's where you have to get brave and put the first marks on the picture. So I use a little bit of solvent, particularly at the start, just to sort of moisten. And then, okay, well, where's she going to go? Well, I'm just going to feel my way in. I'm going to work from the outside in and work out where she's going to be. And it's partly going to be worked out where she's definitely not. Well, she's not over here. Might be somewhere around here. And I'm just searching. It's not totally analytical. It's like, well, somewhere here maybe. And sort of closing in from around the edges. But the aim is to sort of make, at all stages, decisions that you can stand over, even if they're negative. So, the shape is sort of going to emerge with any luck. And I'm trying to be careful not to put dark paint wherever she's going to be, because if I have to work over the dark paint, it's going to be hard work. So I'm finding my way towards her, and trying to get a sense of the shape, the overall shape. But, you know, I'm not really at all worried about the refinement of edges or lines. You know, I'm trying to avoid line, essentially, and just go for splodge. So splodge, splodge. Now, that's all sort of. Essentially, I would consider this sort of stage one. It's one decision. If you walked into a room and saw that picture and looked at it, you'd probably still know that's the person sitting on the chair. You know? It's funny, isn't it? Like, there's very little information there, but you still might read that silhouette as that's a person sitting on a chair. This is where, you know, making very simple decisions about what you're looking at and working from the general to the particular is really important. We're crazy creatures, you know, and a third of our brains are devoted to image processing. And that means we tend to just overthink what we're looking at all the time. And most people's problems with painting is just overthinking, overanalyzing the visual information that they're getting through their eyes. Okay? Your eye is a little squidgy ball filled with goo, and it doesn't see things very well at all. Okay? There's only about 3% of your retina that can see anything in any detail. And in order to fill in the picture and get a sense of reality, your eye sort of darts all around the place. And as well as your eye darting all around the place, your brain, that big chunk, is constantly making guesses and hypotheses about what's out there and filling in information so that what you appear to see is a seamless, coherent visual reality. Whereas what you're actually getting through your eyes is a blurry, murky, very unclear scene. And to paint well, it really helps if you can switch off as much as possible of that visual cortex, and all of the over-processing, and get back to the blurry, murky, basic image that you start with. And this is a good approximation of the first pass. Okay? When we see things, our brain constantly projects. So it's like, it's a shape. It's a woman. It's a woman sitting on a chair. It's a woman with brown hair sitting on a chair. It's a woman with brown hair and a ponytail sitting on a chair. And we add information in that sequence to build up our sense of reality. You have to try and, what I try to get you to do is reconstruct that process. So you start off with, it's a shape, and then it's a woman. But what sort of woman, you don't know yet. And then you work and you add information, but at each stage there's a whole. It's complete, and it makes sense. All right? At every stage you've got some sort of organic unity, and you haven't overanalyzed. And then you can add things. But in adding them, you can also leave things out. All right? So that's sort of that's where I'm trying to, that's sort of the philosophy. Okay? I'm trying to be rough and blurry to reconstruct the first stages of how my brain interprets the subject. Okay? And this is, I suppose, a version of the first primitive image. So I'm going to just keep refining a little bit. But not too much. So I think I have enough just in that to probably start on the next stage. And the other thing to remember here is, okay, one act and I've covered 50% of the canvas. Okay? So in a sense, I'm working quite fast. In the business of covering the canvas, I've made a lot of progress. And that just stands as one decision, essentially. So, next colour, I need a flesh tone. And it's just going to be the most general flesh tone I can get. Let me start, I will just put in, how pink do I need to go? I don't actually need to go that pink. I can go, I'm still mostly brown and white. And I'm going to mix a little bit of black in because I want it to be, not the highest highlights, but
Sorry, is that red iron oxide?
This is the red earth, and that's the brown earth. So they're both iron oxides. It's getting there. So, I will. What brush will I choose?
Can I take a photo of your palette?
Oh yeah,
Is
yeah.
that okay?
You can take a photograph. Yeah, you can do that. So, I'm now going to work in the opposite direction and look at the areas. Start to indicate the in a more positive way where the figure stands or sits. Sorry, this is where I start to stop making verbal sense. I go. I don't know how many of you are sort of the division between visual and verbal people, and I'm obviously quite visual, but it's really hard to use the two parts of your brain at the same time. So once I start seriously trying to use the visual part, I go gaga. So if I don't make much sense, apologies, but that's the way it goes. So these are now the lighter areas on the model, and they're reading against the white, like almost like a negative, which can be a little bit distracting, but I'm just being very general. And at this point again, because I'm generalizing, she doesn't have a face, she's a blob. Okay? So the whole head is blob, essentially. I hope you don't mind, Anne-Marie.
It's all good.
Yeah. So down to here and across. And I'm sort of, lashing on the paint. I want to cover the canvas, and I want that if any of this is exposed, remains exposed as the final paint layer, that it's adequate. That it doesn't need further build-up. It's just there. So again, it's only a very rough version of the skin color, and I'm not, although I can see lots of variety in her skin color, I'm not chasing it yet. Now, and again, remember, I'm working fast as I can, basically, so not to bore you. And you can do all of this over 4 days, being as chilled as you can. So, again, there are some decisions made here, and it's rough, but it's information. And at this point, even though, you know, there's the shadows are sort of in negative, I assume every one of you would absolutely know that's a person. You know, you'd have all made the decision that that's a person sitting on a chair and probably a woman sitting on a chair. Yeah? Based on, you know, fuck all information, essentially. So, this is how little you need to make a statement. You know? To actually communicate information. And holding on to that simplicity is really important. Again, like we need to really, at this point, distinguish ourselves as organic creatures from cameras and things like that. A camera can take in vast amounts of information in a split second. We can't. We just can't. We like small packets of information, which we can then make sense of. And if you give the viewer those small packets of information, you'll please them, you know? Where if you give them, you know, all of the, you know, hairs on their face and, you know, all their, you know, skin pores and everything else, it's often more than anyone needs to make sense of what they're looking at. So remember the simplicity and hold on to it. So I have two colours now, and I need a third, which is a shadow grey. So I'm going to take all of this and some black. So this colour is sort of sitting between the two, between the dark of the shadows and the light of the skin tone. And it will essentially fill in. I could maybe make this a bit better.
When you chose that shadow tone, what made you choose that exact, you know, because the shadows probably change all over the body, but why did you choose that particular one? That mid-tone?
It's an average, you know. I'm trying to get an average over the whole thing. The accents can be pushed backwards and forwards, but if I just get one that's close enough, I can then, you know, modify it. But it needs to be in the ballpark. Not 100% or close to 100%, but just around the right area.
Are you using a different brush between each colours? Or you just
Every
work it off?
new brush for every colour,
Yeah, all the time. Like.
all the time. All right. You can use a brush for a group of colours. You know, like let's say, okay, I want to lighten this slightly. I don't need to get a new colour, but I wouldn't sort of go from red to green. You know. So, and again, I'm generalizing. The fewer colours you use, the greater the unity of the picture. And the greater the coherence. So you can sometimes bunch colours together into a sort of a class. So I'm going into the drape on the seat as well as the shadow of the body. And I'm wondering whether to go and use it for the grey around here. Could do that. It would simplify.
Connor, are you keeping time?
I'm not keeping time actually. Do you want a break?
We started at 2. What time's it now? 'Cause I was trying to do 25.
Okay, let's we take a break now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah. The greys, the shadows, and it's very rough, but
Position good.
yeah, you're excellent, yeah. And the only thing your right arm, your elbow is just a little bit further back, I think. Yeah, it's more like that. It was more out. Yes, that's it. And again, I'm just trying to find, roughly indicate shape. Sometimes just putting down something helps rather than just having nothing to find what I'm doing. I'll go back in with the So, bits of information are getting filled in. Has a breakdown into just 3 colours. I've covered, what, 80% of the canvas. It's crude, but it's not false. It's not fundamentally false. I think when I try to think about the process of truthfulness in painting, and I think truthfulness is important. It's important as a value, but if you think about truthfulness in terms of, let's say, a child asks you a question, a young child needs a really simple answer. And there's an art to being truthful and simple, explaining something really simply, which involves, in its simplification, a certain amount of crudification. It's not absolutely false because it's a good foundation, but it needs to be pushed in terms of refinement. So a child asks you a question and you try to give them a simple answer. Now they might come back 6 months later and say, when I asked you and you told me, what about X? And you say, okay, not quite so simple, and you add another layer. And then maybe 3 months or a year later, they come back and say, remember, we discussed this, and what about Y? And you say, right, well, again, it's not, maybe not that simple, and you add another layer. But at no point do you need to actually lie to the child or falsify what you're telling them in a way that distorts their picture of reality. You're aiming to give them appropriate information for this level that they can process, and then add to it. I think that's a good model for the conversation maybe that even you have with yourself while you're painting about the amount of the information that you need to give yourself and that you need to give the viewer. So you start simple, but crude, but in a way that can be refined. But what you want to avoid at all costs is, the little child comes to you and they ask you a question and you give them blah, and you lose them after the 3rd word, and it turns into a big long lecture, and they think, what was that about? That's the disaster. Okay? So simplicity is king. Truthfulness is really important. But over-elaboration of detail and complexity, that can be left. That can be left out. And you can add it in towards the end of the process. So there's an art to communicating even complex thoughts simply. And that's what I'd recommend as a model, as an aesthetic model for doing this. So I'm going to grab another brush now, and I will need a second grey. Actually, I just grab. So I've already used quite a bit of paint here, and most of the paint that I made up this morning. And the medium, is that over there as well?
Yeah.
The this, yeah. A bit of that. And this is why this holder is great for getting rid of the brushes. So, more white. This lead white is slightly gooey for my tastes. And what I'll often do, it's a bit easier than grinding lead white from scratch, is just to mix a bit of lead powder just straight in, and it bulks up. And because it hasn't been ground, the larger sort of particle size sort of dominates. But I won't do that now just because of time. So, looking at so again, although my palette is quite limited, it is pretty adequate for what I'm doing so far. And I'm that's too dark. So let's lighten this up. And your arm, your right arm, just go back a little bit. Yeah, that's great. And the paint, like you can see, I'm putting the light grey on top of the darker grey, and it's not bleeding through. It's already sort of set, you know. It's not a wet, gooey mess of a painting at this point. It's already reasonably solid, and I can work on it on that basis, and that will be helpful now because I can just get some of those areas where I'm misjudged a little bit initially. And I'm going to introduce just a little bit of variation in the grey skin tone to get some of those So at this point, you know, it's crude, but not entirely inaccurate. And most of the canvas has been covered at this point. What's missing above all else is probably the bottom. I'll get another brush just to do that. I might use some of the titanium with this just because it's out. And it'll make, titanium makes bluer greys than the lead does. And that background is more, just a little bit more of a blue grey. Close. foot down a bit. So it's very messy, but I want some of the mess to stay. I want some of these marks to remain, so that they just create variety in the end product and just work by being adequate. And being interesting in their own right. So like that's a very basic start. There's not a lot to it. It's not necessarily beautiful, but it's not a bad basis to do something. And the paint is already working for me. It's beginning to set. It's beginning to become a sort of a slightly viscous, grippy surface. Then if I put stuff down on top of that, it holds it. So, you know, even though it's very crude, it's a basis. And a lot of what's there should be able to survive the sort of small scale adjustments you might need to make to improve the accuracy. I could definitely have gone lighter in the sort of lightest areas, and I could still do that. I could sort of scrape back. Is that your 25? Okay. All right. But the fewer colours you have in the mixture, the cleaner and the brighter they will be. You know, the purer the tone of colour. Essentially, the more you mix colours together, the browner and the greyer the mixture. So, for my bright skin tone, I'm looking at my brown earth and white as the key, you know, and then maybe see where it goes. Maybe more. And this is where obviously where I can get into palette knife work as well. Just laying colour. Because there's a bed of paint now that will accept what I'm putting on the palette knife. It lacked like the sort of the shadow tone, the half light underneath it.
Is there a reason you're using a knife now and not just the brush, like, or is it just because you feel like it?
There's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I mix my paint typically using the palette knife. And sometimes it's just easier, like it's just like, oh, it's here. Oh, that looks nice. I think a lot of painters have a really bad habit of just using whatever's in their hand. And they keep going. My hand getting dirty. And I often choose, you end up with a favourite brush. So yeah, it's there, and I need, just because I put down maybe a slightly too dark of a skin tone underneath. To brighten it up, I have to just use a bit of paint, seriously use a bit of paint to get that. Jumping tone. And I'm aiming for, I want it to look interesting. I want to look like the marks that I made are obvious throughout, so that anyone looking at it could try to reconstruct my decision making. And that everything that I'm doing is decision making. And that I'm not sort of, there's nothing worse than indecisiveness. It's like, will I, won't I, do I know what I'm doing? If you end up going in circles, that's the disaster. So whatever you do, go in a straight line, go have a direction. And even if it doesn't work out, well, so these are sort of the highest areas, the brightest areas, and I'm going to try and get some of these to work, in together, so that we don't need so much as boundaries. So this again is the nice thing about the palette knife, the way it moves paint. And I like this palette knife because it's got such a point to it. It can really do very accurate things. You can use this the same way you could use a very fine brush. And if I was working this over two 2 or 3 days. I may come back to this. I thought of this as sort of a little disposable exercise that I wouldn't return to. But maybe if you want to, if you'd like me to do more demo, I can come back and sort of look at look at how this might be developed over a couple of days. Anne-Marie, could you, your left hand, could you just move it a little bit more to the top of your, sort of a bit in towards your crotch, so to speak, like over towards the top of your leg? Yeah. A bit further back from your knee? Yeah, that's more like it. The blurry areas are as important as the defined areas. So just getting these so that there's no hard boundary. Is important. So again, it's a little bit like, I think of it like carving, where you can sort of use the paint to carve shadows into the figure. And the outlines, details are quite mobile at this point. I can keep just pushing paint backwards and forwards to meet those contours. and you still have the canvas, you still have the colour on your palette, you can just go back in and re-establish where you need to draw and redraw until you're happy. So, there's will this work? It's not tough. Okay. And get a deeper shadow. start just distinguishing more of what's going on in the background, because there are actually two colours. Laying that on. Just because I may not get back to this. Okay, some indication that she has a face. Can you hold down these for a minute?
No worries.
That's it. You know, it's crude, but it's person, and it's a basis that you could go on and refine, but still leave some of the roughness that's there as the evidence of the process, where you started and where it's going. So, you know, if you'd like, during the week, I can go back and sort of show how I might develop it. But again, I would also like, you know, I feel like I've sort of bored you today, and you've been ended up listening to me talking away, and you didn't want to do anything. So I want you to do stuff and get in and do your own painting, and you know, be ready to go at 10 a.m. tomorrow, inspired, dreaming about painting tonight, and basically, like, insofar as you can, set up, ready to go. If you want to work away, get your paint, get your palette sorted. I've got some tin foil, you can put it on the palette and just put a bit of foil over it and it'll be all ready to go. But that's just, you know, and, you know, it's just messy, and it's intended to be messy. It's, you know, it's play. So I want you to play and make a mess. And be back in that zone where you're a 3-year-old again. And it doesn't matter too much if you make a mess, you know? Because this is the thing, like, everyone can be an artist. Everyone can be a painter. We all start in the same way. We all start with the same capacity. But somewhere along the way, most people get an inhibition when they think, oh, this is dreadful, I can't do that, and they give up, and they never pick up a pencil or a brush again. So you get, like, everyone, every kid, at some point, has a brush in their hand and has great fun, and then they go, oh, I'm no good, and they give up. So that's the disaster. You need to go back before that, oh, I'm no good, and play and have fun, and then you'll get good. So, hope